Hello, this is Cicero, and I'm going to be talking tonight about a moral system, and I think a system of how we, um, as humans and individuals, contemplate and make our decisions, and where some of the hypocrisy that is inherent in being an individual comes from. Now, this idea and reason I'm making a video on this now, it comes from a comment on my previous video made by Dogs of War, in which he stated that Peterson had some hypocrisies in his actions versus what he espouses. Namely, the one I'm going to be focusing on is that he, as a panelist on a freedom of speech panel, along with the other panelists on this panel, decided to remove Faith Goldie after she had a controversial interview with members of the alt-right. Now, Peterson stated on this that he felt that she didn't perform her duty and ask hard questions regarding the beliefs of these individuals like she should have. And that was one of the reasons for him saying that she should be removed from the panel, because it made her too controversial and, in a practical sense, could have been threatened the actual event. Now, I personally think that just because someone is controversial or does something controversial does not mean that they should be deplatformed if they've been invited to a panel. This might be in disagreement with some um, but I hold that people should be allowed to speak their ideas no matter what the circumstances are. And that is a fundamental freedom that ranks very high on my morality hierarchy. Now, explaining that is that we have these base principles that come from our experiences, or not even principles per se, but just values. Like, there's an inherent value in human life, there's an inherent value in freedom. Now, how we work with the world and make ethical decisions comes from how we arrange these different values in a hierarchy. An example of this is um, the idea of human life and the value of human life, or your own life, and the value of freedom. Many of our founding fathers of the United States, they held personal and individual liberty above the value of their individual lives and the lives of those that were needed to have a successful revolution. They knew when signing the Declaration of Independence that there would be human suffering due to their actions. That did not stop them from doing that, nor did they feel like they were morally in the wrong for doing so, even though it was going to cause human suffering. And this is because individual liberty was placed above human suffering and above even the value of human life. Now, with that, there's many more values that we have other than just freedom and human life. And there's values for everything. Practicality is even a value. And from what it might show here is that Jordan Peterson has values that are that are above freedom of speech. And when those values, one of those values that are above freedom of speech came into conflict in his decision with Faith Goldie. And that's just normal for what I believe is normal for human behavior. When a higher value is brought in conflict with a lower value, the lower value, 9 times out of 10, will get the boot, and you'll side with that of your higher value. Does that necessarily make it right? In my opinion, what Jordan Peterson did, in my opinion, no, it does not make it right. He should have stuck with personal liberty and freedom of speech. But that's where my values are higher than any sort of context that could have been placed in. Now, this is where many intellectuals' hypocrisy comes into play, is because they're brought into a situation where these values come in conflict with each other. And when that happens, when two values come in conflict with each other, and it's an either or situation, one of those values have to be undermined for the other value. Now, this sort of ethical system helps explain and solve many of the moral dilemmas that are presented in philosophy that other ethical systems kind of fail on their face. The classic example of a moral dilemma is that of lying to a murderer that was presented to Kant's moral system. Now, I'm not going to go into what Kant's moral system is, but there were hard rules that couldn't be violated if you were going to act ethically. One of those values was to tell the truth. The moral dilemma is set up as such that a friend or a random person knocks on your door and asks for protection because someone is following them and is trying to murder them. You offer this protection. They come into your home to hide. The murderer then knocks on your door. The attempted murderer knocks on your door and says, "Is so-and-so there?" And Kant's moral system says you have to tell the truth. That being said, we as humans, when we see that moral dilemma in sort of that ethical context, the obvious answer is to lie and to deceive the murderer. And this is where kind of this moral system has an advantage. We have hard values and hard rules, so we're not morally relatives where anything kind of goes. Human life is valued. Telling the truth is a value that you shouldn't do. You shouldn't lie. But these values are not all equal. And so there comes into these situations where two values are brought into conflict, like the value of human life over the value of telling the truth at all times. Obviously, for most people, human life is going to be set at its higher value than telling the truth. And this is why the moral dilemma doesn't seem like a moral dilemma to someone who's living the experience, and they can easily choose human life over telling the truth. This allows while this explains and gets rid of most moral dilemmas and allows us to go with our gut feelings on these moral dilemmas without falling into moral relativism, it also explains why we fall into hypocrisy. And it's part of the human condition. We're going to find ourselves in situations where we've said one thing and we're going to end up doing another thing. And that's because we like to talk in absolutes when these absolutes that we're talking in and these values that we do hold, but they come into conflict with values that we deem more important. Therefore, we end up looking like hypocrites when we're not necessarily hypocritical, because we're following our value structure, that this value is more important than this other value. Therefore, when these two values come into conflict, we go with the higher value. Now, this leads us to actions that might appear contradictory to what we've stated in the past, while not leading to any sort of internal contradiction with our own values. And anyone who wants to kind of put this to the test, just think of some moral dilemmas. Set out what you think is lay out a hierarchy of values that you find to be more or less valuable. Then look at moral dilemmas that involve putting into conflict those two values and see what your gut reaction is. Your gut reaction is, if you're honest with yourself, is most likely going to be to support the ethical value that is higher on your list. Does that make you a hypocrite? No, it means that this is a system that we have in place to quickly identify what we need to do in stressful moral environments. Now, with this, it also allows us to think about and come to conclusions on things that we have more time on. And people change over time. No one's values are set in a structure permanently. We can, through more experience and more time dealing with these problems, decide that maybe a value that we held previously at a higher rate than another one drops down lower. And this is just going to come from personal experience and time to think about and reason out what our values are. This is just a basis of this ethical system. If you have any questions or want me to explain something further, I'm more than happy to. Just go ahead and leave a comment on the video. I will get to it as soon as I can. And I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope it kind of explains where some of this hypocrisy comes from in these individuals and these intellectuals that we listen to and some of us look up to. And for the other comments and on the previous video, like I said, I'm going to get to your comments as soon as I can, and I'm more than willing to do a live stream or debate any of my principles and any of my ideas. Now, and just contact me and we can set something up. And I'm not afraid to talk to anyone. I want to talk to people and get to the truth that matters. And I'm not going to deny your idea just because it might be extreme or controversial. All ideas have value and are useful to the public. Whether though we take anything from those or we decide to get behind those and support those, either way, it's useful. And so I just like have a good night, have a good day, and hope you enjoyed the content.